Bombs this week targeting high-profile Democrats and outspoken critics of President Trump, as well as CNN headquarters in New York. Two more targets today: former Vice President Joe Biden and actor Robert De Niro. At least 10 devices have been found so far. None has exploded. No injuries, but a growing concern, obviously, and an intense investigation going on. We want to go now to live coverage of a news conference about to get underway here in New York. The city of New York Mayor de Blasio. Here, this is the police commissioner, James O'Neill. Now, let's listen.
Package investigations we're conducting here in New York City. First and foremost, my message today is that New Yorkers are safe. There are no current credible threats to any individuals, organizations, or locations here in New York City. New Yorkers are safe, but everyone, all 8.6 million residents and the millions of visitors who come here every year, should always remain vigilant and aware of their surroundings. As always, I urge people to alert us to anything that might seem strange or out of place, or anything that makes them feel uncomfortable. They can flag down a cop, call 911, or call our toll-free counterterrorism number, which is 1-888 New York City Safe. And that's for anything new, or if someone has information about any of the incidents this week in New York. We don't underestimate the difference even one person can make towards our collective safety, and neither should the people of New York City. I want to reiterate, as I did yesterday, and as I do anytime we talk about far-reaching investigations of this nature, or of any other kind, that nothing we do in law enforcement we do alone. Through our Joint Terrorist Task Force, comprised of professionals from the agencies you see here today and others, we are investigating all of this with great precision. And I can say with certainty that we will identify and arrest a person or people responsible for these acts. Make no mistake, New York City's intelligence and counterterrorism capabilities are second to none. Every day of the year, not just this week, our detectives and analysts are constantly poring over the threat stream as we proactively deploy our resources around the city as needed. And you're seeing that today, too, out of an abundance of caution. I'll tell you that when we look at the events of yesterday and today, I have immense pride in the incredible work the men and women of the NYPD do each and every day, especially when it involves partnering with the organizations represented here today. I'll conclude by reminding everyone that law enforcement professionals do not care about the politics behind these acts. What we do care about is keeping the public we serve safe. That's it. That's the job, fighting crime and keeping people safe. And through the full and willing partnership of everyone who lives in, works in, and visits New York City, will make the safest large city in the United States even safer. Mr. Mayor?
Thank you very, very much, Commissioner. I want to express my appreciation to all the men and women of the NYPD who have done an outstanding job yesterday and today addressing this situation, and to all of our partners, federal and state partners. Everyone has been working together to address this forthrightly. Now, look, one of the things that we emphasize in a moment like this is that you're going to see a lot of police presence. It's important that we proactively take steps to protect those who have come under attack. Clearly, what we've seen in the last few days is an attack on media outlets, an attack on prominent public figures. We're going to make sure there's expanded presence as long as we need it to show very vividly that New York City takes these issues seriously, that we are defending people who are coming under attack, that part of how we protect the democratic process is to show that threats like this are not taken lightly. So expect that presence. And I know that for those who have gone through this in the last few days, that's a presence that they appreciate greatly. I want to say that everyday New Yorkers have responded to this situation with the kind of strength and the kind of resiliency that this city is famous for. It makes me very, very proud of all 8.6 million New Yorkers, that they have handled the situation with a real sense of resolve. They're not going to let an act of terror intimidate them. And that's really important in this moment, to say whatever the motives of the individuals involved, the people of this city are not being thrown off their game, are not having their values undermined or their way of life undermined. New Yorkers are standing strong right now. And the last thing I want to say is, in a moment like this, there's a lot of concern, there's a lot of fear. Clearly, it's an upsetting time. It's a time when there's been too much hatred and too much division in the air. And in that context, people can feel powerless. I want to remind people that everyone has an opportunity to play a positive and constructive role here. First of all, helping law enforcement. This is something that everyone can do. If you have any information at all that you think could help law enforcement to address this situation, share it with law enforcement immediately. Let them be the judges of the value of the information. Don't hold it back. So many times, and I agree with the commissioner, law enforcement ultimately has proven that they will find the perpetrators, but so many times it's because an individual, a citizen, stepped forward with information that really led to the key breakthrough. If you have information, share it. If you're concerned about packages that could arrive at your home or your workplace, you see something that worries you, reach out to the police, get their involvement to address the situation. People can be part of solving this immediate challenge. But finally, we all can be a part of solving the bigger situation that we're facing as a society, as a nation. A tone of civility, a tone of mutual respect is something we all can create. We shouldn't just ask, what are the most prominent voices doing? We also have to ask the question, are all of us treating each other with respect? Treating men and women in law enforcement with respect, people in the media who report the news, treating them with respect. This is something that we all have to do as a way of addressing a crisis like this, and we can, and I have great confidence that we will. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Jimmy. Right now, the FBI Joint Terrorism Task Forces around the nation are fully engaged on this investigation. We are working quickly to process and analyze relevant information from the suspicious packages recovered over the last few days. We will continue to do so for as long as it takes and until there is a resolution. This is a nationwide investigation involving multiple jurisdictions coast to coast. To give you a sense of scope, just here on the New York JTTF, agencies ranging from ATF, the U.S. Postal Inspection Service, the Secret Service, the NYPD, the New York State Police, and dozens of other federal, state, and local agencies are working shoulder to shoulder. I want to thank those partners for their efforts, their collaboration, and hard work. Much of their leadership is in the room with us today. I also want to personally thank the hundreds of men and women that are up the street working on this together. The FBI will continue to focus all of the resources at our disposal to identify and apprehend the individual or individuals responsible for these acts. The investigation is still in its early stages. I have said this each time that we have faced similar situations, but it bears repeating today. It is vitally important that we do not inadvertently disclose information that could adversely impact our investigation or a future prosecution. The public understands the need for this level of operational security, and for that reason, I will not be able to answer specific questions on what we know. What I can say is that at various times over the last few days, 10 suspicious packages were located at multiple locations in New York, Maryland, Florida, Delaware, and Los Angeles. Law enforcement responded, and each package was collected by experts, and examinations are now underway at the FBI lab in Quantico. As to the devices located in New York, which contained a powder, the initial analysis indicates that the powder in those particular envelopes did not present a biological threat. Other analysis is ongoing. However, it is worth repeating that any device could be considered potentially dangerous and treated as such until proven otherwise. We continue to advise the American public to remain vigilant, as it does remain possible further packages have been or could be mailed. These devices should be considered dangerous. Report any suspicious package to law enforcement, and it is worth repeating, do not touch, do not move, do not handle any suspicious or unknown package. Leave it to the law enforcement professionals. We are also asking the public to call us with any information you may have. We have set up a hotline nationwide. That hotline is 1-800-CALL-FBI. And we also have a link set up where you can provide information via the internet at tips.fbi.gov. We are actively investigating tips you have already provided. Please continue to assist us with our efforts. A moment of your time can make a great difference towards resolving this investigation. Thank you.
I think most of you are up to speed on the events that occurred outside the Time Warner Center at CNN yesterday. What I'd like to do is kind of walk you through the timeline of the events of this morning on Greenwich Street. This begins in the very early hours of the morning when a retired NYPD Intelligence Bureau detective who was awake and watching the news saw the image of the packaging that has been common to most of these devices as they have turned up at various locations. And it struck him that that looked very much like a package he had seen on Tuesday in mail he was to screen for Robert De Niro Productions at their offices on Greenwich Street. He contacted, based on his experience, he knew how to call the bomb squad directly. He spoke to the bomb squad. They advised him to also notify the 1st Precinct, and they went directly to the scene. They were met by emergency service, who with the 1st Precinct were able to locate, based on the security director's instructions, the package where he described it. The bomb squad was then able to use their expertise and equipment to safely package that intact, remove it safely from the building, and then place it in the total containment vessel, which is our bomb transport vehicle, and bring it to the Rodman's Neck range, where it joined the other devices that we got from CNN and from the FBI and Westchester County authorities. By late this afternoon, all of those devices should have been transported by the FBI to the FBI lab in Quantico to be examined by their explosives people so that all the evidence from all of these incidents are in one place. I'd especially like to commend the work of the JTTF. Was in the command post last night as they pulled an amazing effort together with other joint terrorism task forces around the country to run leads, and with FBI headquarters, the work of the Intelligence Bureau detectives under Chief Galati, who have been assisting as a virtual extension of the JTTF as leads come in, the public for calling those leads in, not just to the FBI hotline, but to the NYC safe number that goes to our ops desk. We're up 139% in those calls, so when we ask people to come forward, they do it. Particularly to the bomb squad detectives and supervisors who, whether it's 1 o'clock in the afternoon or in this case 5 o'clock in the morning, are right there with the right equipment, the right training, and know what to do. The emergency service people who drive that truck with the device in the back, the highway people who escort them, and of course all of our partners, postal inspectors, ATF, and of course the JTTF. It's a large team effort, and we're looking for the continued help of the public.
All right, at this point, we're going to take some questions. Yep, second row.
Were these devices rigged to explode, or do you think they're more sent to intimidate?
So we're not going to, as Bill said, we're not going to give you 100% accurate description of what the devices were, but we have to treat them as live devices. This is a protocol that our bomb squad people use, and it keeps everybody safe. Yep, in the back row.
Any reason to believe there may be other packages like this out there?
Yeah, we don't know at this time, but with the postal services that are here, we're doing our best to make sure that if there are any out there, we identify them quickly. Yeah, in the back.
You said that the powder wasn't biological. Is it a talcum powder or some other type of powder? And also, are you exploding the bombs at Rodman's Neck, or you're taking them to Quantico unexploded?
No, we are transporting whatever evidence we have down to Quantico. And as far as the powder, we're just going to leave it as to what Bill said, that it's not biological, and we're still testing it. Yes, in the back row.
Two questions. First of all, is it? I saw reports that they may have come from Florida. Or any of them had they been hand delivered or delivered via courier, or were they sent through the mail? Could they have come from Florida? And then my second question is, what, in terms of being proactive and identifying potentially new targets, are you doing anything to look for other celebrities or
Okay.
media organizations?
Bill, do you want to talk about the first part of your question? And John, maybe you can get the second part, what we're doing proactively?
First part was which? What was the first part of your question again? I'm sorry.
Could they have originated in Florida? Were any of them sent, how many of them were sent to the mail versus delivered by courier?
So I'm not going to get into specifically where we think the packages came from. Some were obviously delivered or in the postal system. I'll leave it at that. Other than that, I'm not going to get into a description of where we think the packages originated. I would reiterate, regardless of where people think they originated, if you see something suspicious or you think you may know information, please provide that to us at those two tip lines.
Hold on one second. We have a second part of that question.
To get to the second part of your question, when there was the first device targeting Mr. Soros, we went to all the locations that were associated with the Soros family, Soros businesses, places that Soros contribute to. When that developed the next day with the bomb at the Clinton residence, then the Obama residence, we really widened our outreach. We have a program called the Nexus program. We have the SHIELD program. So we have a lot of built-in, preset public-private outreach that we just turned on and then turned up. We went to television networks yesterday. We posted police officers in front of locations that we thought might be under increased threat. When the device was discovered at CNN, NYPD personnel were already there working with their mailroom people on recognition and detection, and that was increased to a wider scope today. I don't want to go through what types of people or places we've increased to because we don't want to single anybody out that hasn't received a package. Suffice it to say, we're watching where they go, and we're doing extensive outreach.
Just to add one more thing to that, and if you go on the NYPD website, there'll be information about how you can identify what might appear to be a suspicious package. Somebody over here? Yep.
Question, there's been a lot of speculation and a lot of talk about whether these are hoax devices, maybe not real in some cases, they weren't intended to go off. How would you describe it? Would you describe this as something that was a hoax, or should people really be taking this seriously?
This is something that should be taken seriously. The NYPD and the FBI, we're taking this seriously. We are treating them as live devices. As you see the way our bomb squad detectives went into CNN yesterday, this has to be taken with the utmost seriousness. So as far as a hoax device, we're not treating it that way. Dominic?
For the mayor, Mr. Mayor, do you definitely feel this is terrorism related, and what do you say to the people of New York?
It's absolutely terrorism because it's an effort to use violence to make a political impact. That's the definition of terrorism. The people of New York City are as tough as it gets. This city's been through terror attacks before. The people of the city understand the whole game plan of terrorists is to intimidate us. New Yorkers refuse to be intimidated. That's what we see time and time again. Go back to 1993, the first bombing of the World Trade Center, and everything that's happened ever since. People in this city are full of resolve and don't let these things throw us off our game. And I think that's important to inhibiting terrorism going forward, to consistently show those who would attack us that their efforts are in vain. So New Yorkers have been exemplary. They do heed the warning. If you see something, say something. But I want to remind people, because we see this a lot, people should not hesitate. Sometimes someone's looking at something, they're concerned, they think, oh, maybe I should call, maybe I shouldn't. If it's on the cusp, make the call. If you think maybe you should call, you should definitely call. Let the experts resolve something. If there's anything that's suspicious, let law enforcement be the ones to make sense of it.
Zolan?
I'm just a little confused on the powder. Just as a clarification, are you referring to the white powder that was found in this package mailed to CNN, or is this powder that was in the device?
No, this is the powder that was found yesterday with the packaging yesterday. So it's not biological. It's still being subjected to further testing. Yep, right here. Yep.
About the officer, the retired officer who found the package at De Niro's property?
No, just I'll say that I would like to thank him for doing his job correctly. he saw on the news, and thank you for putting it out there, that this package that he saw yesterday was almost exactly like the package that they were showing on TV, and he took affirmative steps to call us to make sure we could take it away safely. Yes?
Accurate to call this an explosive device, a suspected explosive device, or simply a device? What's the proper terminology?
I would say it's a suspected explosive device. Yep.
But some of them have exploded. Do you believe the intent is to have them not explode, or are they?
Yeah, I'm not gonna talk about intent, but if you were the bomb squad detective, how would you treat it? Right? Okay, in the back row.
Commissioner, I understand you don't want to say whether these things are explosive or not, but do you guys know for yourselves whether these are explosive or hoaxes?
We are treating them as suspected explosive devices. Yeah.
Yourselves, even if you don't want to say publicly?
I'm not going to get into that. The back row. It was a good try, though. Thank you.
Are all the devices that were inside the thing, and did you guys been able to get forensic evidence off the envelopes or things to get identifying information?
Bill, do you want to take that?
So I'm not going to describe whether devices are the same or not. What I will tell you is the folks at the lab at Quantico are extraordinarily thorough, and everyone will be examined in great detail, and we'll go from there.
We've been listening to a briefing by New York City Police along with FBI officials, members of the Joint Terrorism Task Force, updating us with what they know about what are now 10 suspicious devices, possible bombs that have been uncovered over the last 3 days. They've been found in New York City, the suburbs of New York, Maryland, Florida, and Los Angeles. None has gone off. There have been no injuries. You heard a lot of questioning about whether these are in fact lethal weapons or something that meant to intimidate. Standing by to discuss more of this now, NBC Justice correspondent Pete Williams in Washington. Also NBC News law enforcement and counterterrorism analyst and former New York Police Commissioner Bill Bratton. Pete, if I can start with you, a lot of questions about the potential lethality of these devices. Understanding the operational security, they don't want to discuss what they know and don't know about these devices. But what are you hearing from other sources?
Yeah, and the second thing is they want people to continue to treat them as though they are potentially dangerous because the bombing could evolve here. But what we're told is that some of these devices they've determined could not have exploded. But the question is, were they designed to be scary looking but ineffective, or were they designed to explode but somehow the bomber just couldn't get it done correctly? They don't know the answer to that. But the conclusion is that some of the ones they've looked at so far, they probably think they couldn't have exploded, although they note that many of them haven't been analyzed in any detail yet. And they do feel, and they were very careful not to say this, but they do have some reason to believe that some of these devices, or perhaps all of them, may have been mailed from Florida. That's something they're very actively investigating.
All right, Pete, let me turn to Bill Bratton right now. Bill, Commissioner O'Neill noted at the outset of his remarks that the NYPD isn't about the politics that could or possibly be behind all this, but certainly they're not ignorant of the potential message here. How do they begin to process potential motives based on not only the device itself, but the packaging, the misspellings, the impression, at least on one level, that this is the gang that can't shoot straight?
Well, the idea of the multiple streams of investigation, some of which were outlined during the press conference, are all intended to come to resolution in terms of identifying the suspect or suspects, as well as the motive. What was the motive? And that's a key part of the ability to go forward with the prosecution. So what you had just witnessed is an awareness press briefing. They want to keep the public aware of the potential danger. The idea being this first grouping, these 10 devices, none of them have exploded if they ever had the capability to explode. But the idea or the concern is there may be more of them out there of a similar type. But who's to say that whoever created them in the first place is not sending out a group of devices that would then be followed by a second wave? And that's where they're looking to keep the public aware that, look, this isn't over. This is in process. This is something to be aware of, trying to reduce the fear, but to stay very aware of.
Bill Bratton, thanks. We'll have updates as warranted, and I'll see you on NBC Nightly News. For now, Lester Holt, NBC News, New York. Good day, everyone.